Hi, it's David from Life with Parkinson's. If you're new here, welcome. I hope you'll consider subscribing. For everybody else, thank you for coming back and watching another episode. A few weeks ago, I got a question from a viewer asking me to go just a little bit more into the details of what my pre-diagnosis Parkinson's symptoms were. Basically, when I look back on my diagnosis from May of 2017, I can see the things that led up to my diagnosis, but at that time, when you're going through them, it isn't so clear. So that's what this video is going to be about, just exploring and explaining the symptoms. It's probably a good idea I do it before I forget, because another 10 years from now, looking back might be a little foggy. So it's actually a good question and an interesting one. And I'm happy to go back and talk about those symptoms a little bit more and explain what was going on. Okay, I talked to my wife about this yesterday, and the biggest symptom that stands out for us was the fatigue. I would get tired really easily, and that goes back a good 10 years before my diagnosis. That kind of takes us back to 2006 and 2007. There are definitely a few situations that stand out for me. In 2006, I was finishing my career at the local pulp mill because it was shutting down. There was a lot of overtime available in the pulp mill. It was just the nature of the business. And I noticed that I was having trouble with my workmates keeping up. Everybody seemed to just be able to deal with all of the overtime easily, whereas I would get very tired. There is one incident that really stands out for me at the pulp mill shortly before it closed. When we would work a 14-hour shift, a lot of times we would have a dinner break, and a lot of us would take a nap during that break. And that's what I did. I went somewhere and laid down, and everybody went back to work except me. And they're all like, "Where's Dave?" So my buddy came and got me because he knew where he was. He was yelling for me. He said he had to shake me awake. I'd never done that at work before. I would never sleep all the way through a dinner break. There's just no way. The second symptom that really stood out for us was the anxiety. And that seemed to start about a year or two after the pulp mill closed and I had begun my career as an overhead door technician, which is something I'd always wanted to do, not specifically an overhead door technician, but I'd always wanted to learn a trade. And I did learn a trade, and I became very good at it. And I actually really enjoyed it. But for some reason, the anxiety just came like every morning. Like I would go to work just stressed out, and it would take a few hours for it to go away. And it would happen every day, and I'm like, why am I so stressed? I'm just going to work. And then around, say, like 11 or 12, all of a sudden it would just ease off. And maybe that's because I was definitely getting more exercise. And I would do a lot of the installs because I enjoyed them. I'd be at the same site for like 6 or 7 hours, putting some doors and operators in, and I would get a good workout. Consequently, I lost a lot of weight. The anxiety would go away, but then it would come back the next day, and it was really hard to deal with all those years. And the strange thing was, it just ran the same pattern every day. Like I would wake up and have anxiety about going to work, doing my job, and then I would start on my job, and then a couple hours it would go away, and I would be fine the rest of the day. Over the last 10 to 15 years, that anxiety has just increased, and that's the second main symptom that we can trace back 8 to 10 years pre-diagnosis. So a year or two after the anxiety started, like we're like 2008, 2009, was when I really began to notice my first motor symptoms, and it was my left hand. Darn you, left hand, for not doing what you're told. A lot of my fine motor skills with my left hand began to be affected. Like, part of being a garage door technician is being able to deal with a lot of little bits and pieces, a lot of little parts and wiring. At that time, I was working with someone, and we would often joke about, "Come on, left hand, you can do it." And we both found it very funny, but I found it very strange because I was able to use a screwdriver the same way I could in my right hand as in my left hand, and all of a sudden, left hand wouldn't do what it was told anymore. I really had to coax it along, and that was the beginning of the deterioration of the left side of my body. And it's really strange. when you're up on a ladder and you're holding the bolt with your right hand and you're holding the nut with your left hand and you're trying to get it through the track and put it together and you're not able to. It's very frustrating. So basically, the problems in the left side of my body just really began to increase from that point on. I developed a limp in my left leg, which we found really strange because in 2006 I fell off a ladder at work and I needed 3 surgeries on my right foot to fix it. So instead of a limp on my right, which would have been normal, I developed a limp on the left side of my body. I don't know if you've seen the movies with the sloth in it. Ice Age. I don't know if you've seen the Ice Age movies, but sometimes the sloth will drag himself around. That's basically how I began to feel. I began to feel that there were basically 2 sides to my body. My right side, which was dragging my left side everywhere it needed to go. And then it continued up into my shoulder, and people were starting to ask me, have you had a back injury or did you hurt your neck? Because my left shoulder would be so tight, it would sit higher than my right shoulder. So I kind of developed this lopsided personality stature that a lot of people would ask me if I was okay. I'd be like, yeah, I'm perfectly fine. It's just my shoulder's tight and I have no idea why. That tightness made its way down to my left hand. So my wife and I would go shopping at the mall and we'd be holding hands with my left hand and she'd be like, ow, you're squeezing me. And I'm like, I am? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she'd be like, yeah, we gotta change sides. So she would only hold my right hand because my left hand would just clench. My left hand would clench so much it would hurt her. And I'm like, I had no idea it was happening at all. And about the same time, the problem in my left hand started. We're like 2011, 2012 now. Was when I began to have more like emotional, mental problems, like stressful situations were just starting to get really hard to deal with. Like my work partner at the time took a trip, a problem came up at work and I just could not deal with it. Like I had no idea what to do. It turned out to be very embarrassing for me because I had to track him down at his hotel and get him to phone me and get him to tell me what to do, and I had never done that. I'd always been able to watch things. We took turns having time off. He would watch the company when I was off, and I would watch the company when he was off, and obviously we would contact each other if we needed to. But when someone goes to a different country, and you need to track them down at their hotel and get them to call you to help solve a situation that really wasn't a big problem, for me it was really embarrassing. And the funny thing is, we're about halfway through the symptom set. Like, how would you attribute that to Parkinson's, right? Like, just looking at those symptoms, like, how could they add up to Parkinson's disease? Like, my wife would call, her sister or her dad or her mom and say, something's up with Dave. And she would talk to them about it, and nobody would have an idea about what was going on. How do you go and pick a disease and go, yeah, it's Parkinson's, right? It's almost impossible to do. Like, who could put those symptoms together and think it was Parkinson's disease? So moving forward with more of the symptoms, I would spend a lot of time playing video games on the weekend with my son. Yeah, I couldn't use the controllers anymore. Like, my hand-eye coordination had virtually disappeared. What I really thought was happening was that I was aging out of my profession. That was kind of the idea that I latched onto, was that I was getting too old and the work was too physical for me. It didn't make sense because the job sites that I would go to, gosh, some of the carpenters, there were in their 60s and they were just fine. Like, I was just in my early 40s and aging out of the workforce. Yeah, it didn't make sense at all. So basically from that point on, from 2013 to 2017, things just began to get worse. Right? People would say, why aren't you smiling? Like, I had this incident at a job site, and one of the owners of the house, she thought I was really unhappy to be at her home installing her garage door. And on the contrary, I was very happy. Another symptom that came on was drooling, right? Before meals or during a meal. The amount of drool coming out of my mouth was like an insane amount. Sleep became a problem, right? I'd always slept really well. I started to have a problem sleeping with my wife. Like, any movement, like if she put her iPad on or picked up her phone or like breathed too hard, I could not fall asleep or I could not stay asleep, and that was the beginning of her sleeping more on the couch and eventually ending up in separate bedrooms, which is very isolating and lonely. One of the things my wife noticed that I didn't was resting tremors. She would be in bed with me and I'd be laying down trying to go to sleep, and she would say, "Do you feel that?" And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "The bed is shaking." And I'm like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." She says, "I think it's you." And I'm like, "There's no way." I tried going to Toastmasters around that time, but when I got up in front of a group of people to speak, I mean, we're talking like 5 or 6 people. We're not like talking about a packed auditorium here. I would get tremors, right? If I was serving communion at church on Sunday, I would get so nervous from the people watching me, I would start shaking. And that was really unusual because I grew up singing in the choir, playing in the high school band. I would play the piano and sing in front of people. But just, being at church and serving communion, the tremors would come on so bad that I was like, should I be doing this? Am I going to drop everything on the floor? So I guess you can say that was the tremors were like the first symptom that would point to Parkinson's, but even at that point, we never put it together. I basically thought it was stress at work. Stress would be the one that seemed to fit perfectly, like to cover everything I had, because my wife was like undergoing these very expensive treatments for endometriosis. My daughter was a type 1 diabetic. We were all getting worried about me, but we all just came down to it like Dad's just stressed out from everything that's going on. Yeah, so basically when we arrived at 2017, it was basically my family doctor that figured out I had Parkinson's, because I had been going to see him for something unrelated. I would keep getting these warts on my feet. No, I was in there about every 2 weeks for a number of months getting my feet worked on, just trying to get rid of the warts. But in the end, it turned out to be a good situation, because all of a sudden one day he just looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Is your shoulder okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm basically sore." So he grabbed my left arm, swinged it around a little bit, and went, "I'm going to send you to see a neurologist." And boom, over my head. But for my wife, it was like, there is something going on with Dave. And which was a good thing that somebody figured it out, because we were starting to argue quite a bit. And we were trying to make some life decisions at that time, and our family doctor was like, "Just hold off on these decisions. Just wait a bit. Don't make a major decision at this point in your life. Just wait a little while." And we're like, "What?" All the while, he's calling the neurologist over and over and over again to fit me in to see me. Then we finally got the news, May 28, 2017, on a Sunday, that I had Parkinson's disease. So I hope talking about these symptoms and going into them a little bit more helps, but I wouldn't use them as a guide to do any sort of self-diagnosis. Parkinson's disease on its own is very difficult to diagnose. Even in my case, it wasn't straightforward. Like, I underwent a number of tests to rule out other conditions. I went to see another neurologist and a dementia specialist to confirm my diagnosis, as well as 2 MRIs. So it's not a cut and dried thing. Like, there's no actual test for it. So yeah, I encourage you not to use my symptom set as a diagnostic tool, because it's probably not going to fit you at all. So what do you think? Are you having trouble with some pre-diagnosis symptoms? I would be very interested to hear what you're going through, as I'm sure other people would. I know there are people on this channel that are struggling to get a diagnosis for their situation, so sharing with them may be helpful and provide each other with a little bit more insight. As always, let's take this journey together. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Have a good day. Goodbye.